All right, awesome. So again, thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Brianna McClure, and I am a program officer at Enterprise. I'm based in the New York market, and I work on a number of programs, including asset management, community land trusts, as well as housing as a pathway to justice here in the New York market, which I'm super excited to talk about today and the exciting work that Enterprise National has done on this item. So quickly, we will have an exciting panel, which we'll get to very soon. But I would love to just talk quickly about Enterprise for some of you that may be familiar and really those that may not be familiar, what Enterprise is, what we do, and then talk about the Housing as a Pathway to Justice Toolkit. So again, thanks everyone so much. Okay. Awesome. So again, as I mentioned before, some of you may be unfamiliar with Enterprise, but Enterprise is a national organization with state and local partners in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands. So our local offices, of which I'm based in one in New York, we serve local and regional needs across the country. So together with our partners, we focus on, the greatest need, which is the massive shortage of affordable rental homes. And our goal is to achieve three items: increase housing supply, advance racial equity, and build resilience and upward mobility. So to achieve these goals, we actually operate across three different divisions: solutions, capital, and community development to do our work. We also invest in affordable housing projects as a community development financial institution. We serve as one of the largest nonprofit owners and developers in the Mid-Atlantic region. We advocate for policy at the federal, state, and local levels to advance affordable housing goals. And we create programs to increase affordable housing access and opportunity. So today, again, we will be talking about the Housing as a Pathway to Justice programmatic initiative. So to talk a little bit more about this initiative, we're aiming to understand the intersection of housing and the criminal legal system. And we do this in a number of ways, but we do this through local place-based support, which I'll talk more about, building an ecosystem, as well as driving systems change. Those are really areas that we've been aiming to achieve. We've been working on this initiative for several years now, again, across various markets and at the national level. So, um, to give a little bit more information on that, again, Housing as a Pathway to Justice is a national initiative, and we've been doing this work across several markets. And I'll just ask quickly if you could please mute yourself to avoid any distractions, that would be great. So this is just an outline of some of the work that we have done at the national level, but also in some of our markets as well. So we have the Mid-Atlantic region, we have the New York market, we have NOLA, Ohio, the Southeast market, and this is just highlighting some of the work that we have accomplished to date. But there's so much that we have done, including investing in these sorts of housing developments as well. Okay. So today, I'm super excited. We're super, super excited to talk about the Housing as a Pathway to Justice National Toolkit. This was developed in partnership with the Fortune Society. We are super, super excited and grateful to be able to have collaborated with the Fortune Society on this groundbreaking toolkit. It's interactive. You'll see here, these are some of the key components of the toolkit. However, we also have appendices in the toolkit as well, including a survey of state and local policies across several states and geographies, a list of affordable housing and reentry service providers, and more. So a link will be dropped in the chat to go to the toolkit. So take a look at it. Um, please take a look at that exciting resource. And this will also be what we will talk about more in depth today with our partners. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we're going to jump right into the panel section. All right. All right, bear with me as okay. Okay, everyone should now be seeing each other. Okay, great. All right, so now I'm going to spotlight our speakers. Okay. Okay, everyone. So, all right, we have our speakers up on the screen. So I'm super excited to welcome our speakers today. And I will give a introduction and read their bios. So first, I will start with Ben Mesh. Ben Mesh is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Fortune Society, leading Fortune's housing development activities, as well as administering Fortune's contracts and risk management program and overseeing the design and development of the nonprofit strategic framework. During his work with Fortune, he has handled complex real estate transactions, which have required multiple funding sources and regulatory approvals. Currently, he is overseeing the financing and project development for a range of newly opened and in development Fortune housing developments, including affordable housing for people with prior justice involvement in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. Mr. Meshes actively provides technical assistance to other organizations in the area of housing development for individuals with criminal justice histories. Additionally, Mr. Mesh regularly advises organizations in the areas of project development, risk management, and financing. He earned his JD from the University of Florida College of Law in 1992 and his BA in political science from Columbia University in 1989. So we welcome Ben. Next, I would like to introduce Pastor L.J. Jennings. Pastor L.J. Jennings has a broad and diverse background in business, community engagement, housing development, and as well as seminal affairs. Over the past 40 years, Pastor Jennings has successfully operated with the with the broad real estate industry, having run real estate and mortgage entities, developed several affordable housing projects, and founded and run several nonprofit organizations. Currently, Pastor Jennings operates a 100-bed transitional housing facility for formerly incarcerated individuals, a 72-bed reentry program, a 52-bed facility for aged out foster care, and programs for substance use disorder and mental health. His reentry services extends into Cleveland, Ohio, where he established a 36-bed program along with a 20,000 multi-purpose center for community development and navigation services. He serves as the president of his community development company, leads a consortium of churches in the Bay Area, all while pastoring and thriving in growing church in Oakland, California. In addition to his many responsibilities, he is a senior pastor of Kingdom Builders Christian Fellowship, an Oakland, California-based ministry. He is an accomplished speaker, teacher, presenter, frequently sharing his insight and knowledge with audiences across the United States. Pastor Jennings holds a doctorate in theology from Sacramento Theological Seminary, an honorary doctorate in ministry from Bell Grove Theological Seminary, a master's and bachelor's in Christian education from C.H. Mason Bible College, and he also attended California State University, Hayward, where he majored in political science and business administration. He is also the graduate of Dale Carnegie courses and a lifelong resident of Oakland. Next, I would like to introduce Sherry Combs. Sherry Combs is the Director of Community and Youth Engagement at Covenant House, New Orleans, bringing 14 years of dedicated service to survivors of human trafficking and unhoused youth. As a passionate survivor advocate, Sherry has captivated audiences nationwide with her powerful presentations, educating key stakeholders on the realities of trafficking and the importance of community action. Sherry works closely with local, state, and federal law enforcement to identify and address human trafficking cases. She is also trained in child forensic interviews by the American Professional Society on the abuse of children, which enhances her ability to assist and support vulnerable populations. Throughout her career, Sherry has received numerous honors for her anti-trafficking efforts, including recognition from the City of New Orleans and Senator Feder of Ohio. Her expertise has led her to share her insights across Louisiana and the nation, presenting to health and human service professionals, law enforcement, political leaders, and community organizations. She's also a notable speaker at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. She has contributed to global conversations, mitigating risks. She has also served as a survivor of the Survivor Advisory Board under former First Lady Donna Edwards, and was the chair of the Adult Subcommittee on Adult Sex Trafficking for Human Trafficking Commission. As a founding member of the core team of the Greater New Orleans, oh, excuse me, there we go. As a founding member of the core team of Greater New Orleans Human Trafficking Task Force, she continues to play a key role in shaping efforts to combat human trafficking and support survivors in her community and beyond. So thank you again to our wonderful speakers that are here today. So I will start just by asking a few questions to learn more about your work, learning more about the region that you serve. Again, we have California, Oakland in particular represented. We have Cleveland, Ohio. We have New York, and we have the New Orleans or NOLA region as well represented. So again, this is a national tool, so we really wanted to get national perspectives involved. So again, with that being said, this toolkit is really meant to address the challenges at housing people that are impacted by the criminal legal system and to provide resources for peers in the industry that also want to provide this housing. So with that being said, I'll start off with the first question. What are the barriers to securing housing for people impacted by the criminal legal system? And why is quality, affordable, and stable housing so important?
I'll come off. Some of the barriers that we see with our unhoused youth, which is 22 and younger here in New Orleans, for especially the ones that are returning citizens to the community, is they may not have proper documentation. They're coming out of a system to enter homelessness, and that leaves them vulnerable for recidivism here in Louisiana, into returning back into the system. There's a lot of unstable housing here, unaffordable housing. The average salary here does not align with what the average cost of living is here in New Orleans. And that puts people, especially youth, that oftentimes work jobs that are minimum wage, but not livable wage, at great risk. And it's very important when you talk about not returning into systems to have stable employment and stable housing.
I'd like to chime in on that also. It is certainly for California, it's a big affordability issue. There's no question in California, and I'm sure the same for Ben in New York. And when we look at the average median income in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm in Northern California. We're at $128,000 to just as a median income, which makes it very, very difficult for the reentry population. Average median price homes in our area are between 1.2 and 1.5 million. And so if we look at that housing value, then you could also imagine that the rents are equally exacerbated. And so affordability is a big deal. The other piece in that affects the reentry population that we serve is not just the affordability piece. It is that, but it is also in a competitive housing market. Landlords are looking at history, rent history, and when they look at rent history, they don't have that rental history. I'll talk later, maybe where it might come up, but how we're addressing that rental history piece. I think we've gotten creative in that piece, and I think that it's something that potentially could be used elsewhere. But when you look at that rental history, they don't have that long history. And so that becomes problematic. And then certainly just the barriers of getting into housing, just with the deposits and the first month's rents and the other things that go with that. But those all really result in these barriers that continue to plague the populations that we serve. And so it's incumbent upon us as housing providers to really look at creative ways to overcome those barriers that continue to be a barrier.
Yeah, building on what Sherry and the pastor said, I think it goes beyond just the structural barriers that many especially in cities like New York and San Francisco, the barrier just to getting affordable housing is very high. But for this population, they also are subjected to certain myths around individuals who have incarceration history or criminal justice involvement. The idea that they may make bad employees, they may make bad neighbors. There are all these myths that are held by individuals and unfortunately are you see in the media in the way things are covered. So beyond even having the affordability issues, you have the stigma that's attached, unfortunately, to individuals who've had criminal legal experience, which is exactly, that myth is exactly untrue. And I think part of today's discussion with this panel and trying to explain to potential organizations that would like to get into the space is that individuals who have criminal legal history make amazing tenants. They make amazing employees. They are people who very much value the opportunities that they are given, especially when you're re-entering from such a traumatic experience as incarceration. But needless to say is that we have to overcome that as well when we're looking at developing this housing. And we'll talk more about it, that there are myths within when we're doing housing development that lenders hold about this population, that insurers think about this population. And what I would say the bottom line is the way we combat that is through education, is through explaining to people, explaining to as many people as we can that all of these things that they think about this population are not really true. And just the final thought is this. In our experience at Fortune, we're a 57-year-old organization that provides wraparound services to individuals returning from incarceration. We have found that housing is fundamental to successful reentry. If you are not safely housed and a place where you feel that you are safe, it is very difficult to accomplish the other parts of a successful reentry: employment, education, getting mental health services that are needed, or substance use treatment. All of these things are very difficult to accomplish, family reunification, without being safely housed. So from an investment standpoint, it's our belief that investing in this housing is so important for successful reentry. And when it's open, in our own experience, it makes generational change. And I think we should, when we're approaching this, understand that this is something that is so fundamental to successful reentry.
If I may, let me echo what Ben has said. Certainly there are these myths that I think that we all are aware of that continue to be a barrier for many of our residents and the population that we serve. And that's why I'm especially appreciative to this toolbox, to this toolkit that was created here with Enterprise and Fortune. I think that in terms of the education that Ben spoke of, I think he's spot on. We've got to understand the populations that we serve, not merely from just housing them in whatever programs that we're housing them in, but in the broader sense of the communities that we serve. The myths that are held by individuals that may not have the kind of lived experiences that they have. This toolkit is I think is absolutely important and critical to the work that we're all doing. And I would encourage all of us to dig down into it, because what it does is provides us with the kinds of tools and the kinds of things that we think that are available, and then helps us to really frame this in a different perspective. And I think that's important when you have individuals like Sherry and Ben, and even myself, on that are doing this work on the front lines and on the ground. We carry insights into some of the best practices. We carry the insights into how we can navigate through the institutional racisms and the myths that are held about these populations, et cetera, et cetera. And I will tell you, if I did not share with you the kind of program that we were doing for the population that we serve, and just invited you in to talk to our residents, you would never know. You would never know that they are systems impacted. You would never know that they have the backgrounds that they have. And so I think it's important that we see these individuals that we house, this population, not as justice impacted, and not as reentry, and not as formerly incarcerated, and not as all of these other labels that we put on them, but just as individuals that are suffering from some of the same challenges that some justice impacted individuals are suffering from.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for that. I think you all really talked about some of the more systemic issues that we're seeing. I would say one, in the affordable housing market in general, and the challenges to that, but even more so, people that have been impacted by the criminal legal system, the additional challenges that they are facing, the stigmas, the myths, just by their previous experience. So I think certainly, their previous experience does not define them, and as you both highlighted, you would never know. So I think that's really important to highlight. So thank you for that, and that is a perfect segue into my next question. So this question is for you, Ben. Why did Fortune step up to collaborate with Enterprise on creating a toolkit about developing housing for people involved in the criminal legal system?
It was Enterprise presented us with an incredible opportunity, and we are so grateful that Enterprise wanted to partner with us in this project. And I just want to acknowledge that I have fellow colleagues on the call, Lily Shapiro and Reggie Chapman. This was a Fortune team effort, and Sharima Shavanas, who's not, I don't believe she's here today, but this group worked tirelessly. The goal was to create a document, or a living document, that would really show other providers that there is a pathway to do this work. We believe that it's going to take other nonprofits thinking about this field and thinking about it creatively to create this housing. But I think when you look at doing affordable housing or creating housing, it's a daunting project. The amount of things you have to do to create this type of housing, and we're in New York City, so the bureaucracy here is huge, and to navigate it and to do it may be off-putting, and many nonprofits would think, well, we really can't do this. What we wanted to show is, one, lay out the atmosphere or the environment that this is in, but also show that there are ways to accomplish this. And there are creative partnerships that can be created between nonprofits and for-profit developers, the nonprofits and the government entities in the areas, and foundations and organizations like Enterprise, and faith-based institutions. And we can talk about this, there are so many different ways to do this. And that creativity and creating the different partnerships is what's going to go a long way to alleviating this real dire housing shortage for individuals who are have legal criminal impact on their lives.
Certainly. Thank you so much for that, Ben. And yeah, I think you really hit it on the nail. a lot of you and really everyone on this call is really working in different ways to increase housing, to make sure that people are able to get the housing that they need. And so we were super excited to work with Fortune as well. And I see several Fortune people on this call, as well as enterprisers. Big shout out to the Housing as a Pathway to Justice strategy and planning team that also worked tirelessly on putting together this toolkit and coordinating and everything. But certainly, we wanted this to be a toolkit created by peers, and then having a discussion today with peers on creating opportunities to work with each other, touching upon one another's resources, insights, expertises in order to create the housing that's really needed. Of course, every geography is different. It has different challenges, different opportunities as well. So again, that's why we really wanted to get all of you on this call and have a larger discussion. Certainly, there are some, myths or even fears as well with regards to creating this kind of housing. Maybe for some nonprofit organizations that feel as though, they're too small or they don't have enough resources. Maybe to others as well that feel as though, they're too traditional in that sense. So we're super excited to be able to have been able to collaborate with Fortune on this interactive and really insightful tool, having all the information in one area.
And I would say this, housing development um, is a complicated process. Creating housing anywhere, we deal with, you know, building codes, you deal with all these different things. But one thing that I found in this whole process in the years I've been doing this is the more we educate our government partners, the more we educate the private developers, the different parts of housing development around this specific area, the more interest they have in it. And they see the return on investment and the impact that this makes. It's quite simple. We know what it costs to house someone in jail for a year. We've heard the figures. I've heard here in New York City for housing someone in Rikers, and I'll let my teammates tell me if I'm wrong, but it could be in excess of $400,000 a year to house someone in jail. And thinking about that, if you gave housing developers like Fortune and other nonprofits that same money that you were charging them, 400,000, we could create permanent housing for scores more people. And that permanent housing would go a long way to allowing people to successfully re-enter into society. Um, and it's really for a lot of the uh, government, it's explained to them that this investment has such a great return for their communities, for for society in general. And it's the same thing with lenders, with insurers. The more I talk to them about what we do, the more they want to be a part of it. We have lenders now we go to consistently who want to lend into these projects. We have insurers who have no problem. We do not get charged this is a myth, extra higher rates because we house individuals with criminal justice history. We pay the same, unfortunately, high insurance rates that the other developers pay. But there is nothing added on because we have a population that is somehow, in their minds, more risky or could cause more problems. And the other thing I would say is this, we have proof of concept in our affordable and supportive housing programs. We have community members who live there who have no criminal legal system experience right next door to the individuals who have it. And just like the pastor said, if you walked in our building, you would not know who has criminal justice history and who doesn't. And the way the building's cohesion and the way it's developed, the building really takes care of itself. And they are very proud of where they live, all of our residents. And it's incredible to see how they've grown as a community. So much that I would say, and I'm not sure about the exact number, but we opened this building, I think in 2010. Almost all of the original residents are still there. We've had very small turnover because they all very much enjoy living in that building. And I think
Yeah.
as nonprofit providers, we can create those atmospheres for both the community and for individuals who've been impacted by the legal system.
Yeah,
Can I add
absolutely.
something to that, Brianna?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Just so I know that Ben is, and this is really for the edification of everyone on the call. And especially Brianna, you had mentioned something about, organization might be maybe feeling too small. I don't, and so even though Ben spoke about development and the challenges that go with developing a property, typically when we think about development, it's ground up. But when we think about housing for this population, I don't want you to think about just in the development of a brand new building. I want you to think about development in for this population in repurposing buildings. How about an old hotel motel? How about an apartment building? How about a single family house? I mean, I want us to think about it in terms of where your market is and what's going on in your particular market. And it's not always ground up. I just wanted to add.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's a really excellent point, Pastor. And that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is, how do housing needs vary across different parts of the country? So would love to learn about, the more regional challenges that each and every one of you are experiencing and how you've been able to tackle that.
So here in New Orleans, we have quite a few unique challenges. One is that we have the highest incarceration rate in the entire United States. We average 816 people per 100,000 compared to the national average of about 450 people per 100,000. On top of that, we have had several natural disasters that have literally changed the landscape of this city. And while we've had development of housing come in, it's been a development of a certain kind of house and that outprices your average annual salary here. So on top of that, if you incorporate all the other challenges that people are facing, especially people re-entering into the community, the false narratives and the expectations, it has become a challenge to find long-term stable housing because there's such a fear that if you bring somebody in that has something from their past, they have lived experience, they're going to drive crime into your community, or they're going to destroy your property, or they're not eligible, of course, to purchase a home. A lot of them are re-entering the community with substantial financial debt, whether it's court fees, fines, or debt they had prior to serving their time in jail, and now they're out and they're bonded and forced to make those payments. And so that's where community engagement truly does become invaluable, going out and partner with other organizations and really advocating strongly within communities and allowing people in those communities to have an open door segue, so to speak, to attend meetings, to be able to be vocal, to have tough conversations, and bring in people that have lived experience in to dispel some of those false narratives, but also be part of that decision-making process. And as organizations, when we commit to follow up, we have to follow through, right? So it's not just finding a home to put someone in, it's also being there to not only support that person in their stable housing, but supporting maybe the landlord, supporting the neighborhood, supporting the community as a whole. So not making those empty promises. Those really do encourage long, sustainable relationships. And we find that we have very committed landlords. We have very committed banks and lenders that work with us that are committed to serving our clients over and over again because we've kept that partnership, and we've made sure that we've stayed engaged throughout the process.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Sherry. Thank you so much, because I think she's spot on with regards to partnerships in the community and maintaining those partnerships. In terms of, back to our affordability issue here, the housing that that we're able to bridge, get around the barriers for these populations, especially with the housing, with the affordability, is really shared living and communal living. Communal living is really taking a foothold. Communal living is where there's one centralized kitchen. Everyone has private bedrooms and bathrooms, but one centralized kitchen where they actually share in one centralized kitchen. That makes it a lot more affordable for folks. So communal living, shared living also. We think about shared living in the context of group homes, if you will, is also a way for us to deal with the affordability crises. And then doing master leasing, where we master lease properties, which is important to what Sherry's point was, which is really staying engaged with partners. So we master lease properties so that individuals can be able to live in a communal shared living. And we see that as a stepping stone to their own place. You come out of incarceration paying nothing, and then you go into, typically a transitional housing program that pays nothing, and then you're at some point where you time out of maybe a transitional housing program that you're mandated to go to, and now you're confronted with the reality of high rents and all. So really seeing it as a stepping stone and making sure that we're putting individuals on a path to not just self-sufficiency, but on a path to being able to build their own housing and their own housing history.
Building on what the pastor said, I think we're in a similar situation here in New York. We are in a housing crisis in the city, and it's spoken about a lot. It's covered in the media. There is a real lack of affordable housing in New York City, and added that onto to individuals who have criminal justice impact, it makes housing extremely difficult to find. I think about it in two ways. One, I would say this: we're not going to be able to build our way out of this problem. I say that while we are heavily invested in developing projects for individuals with criminal justice history, but we also, I think, and that's where Fortune is really a dual track organization. We also are heavy in advocacy, and we were very, along with Enterprise, very much a part of getting the fair chance for housing passed in New York City, really trying to get rid of the blanket discrimination that many landlords had around individuals who had criminal justice history. And Fortune has also used the courts and litigated on this issue as well against very bad landlords who would not accept any individuals who had a criminal justice history, and totally keeping them, even if they had the credit, the job, all the other things you would want in a tenant, they still would not rent to them. And that we found in our litigation that these owners were just, if you have this existing and these owners have a lot of units under their control, you're really cutting off a large part of the market to people who have been justice impacted. And from a development standpoint, what Fortune has done, looking at where we are, is become very creative in the way we look to develop projects. Like the pastor talked about, we are right now developing what was an illegal hotel on the Upper West Side of Manhattan into permanent housing for both community members and individuals who are justice impacted. This is a master lease project as well, working with the DHS, with the Department of Homeless Services here in New York City. It is a very innovative and new way of trying to take buildings that here in the city and older buildings and repurposing them for affordable, permanent, and supportive housing. And the other thing I want to talk about is that the community, individuals who are impacted with criminal justice, it's not a homogeneous community. Individuals come out of who are impacted with incarceration come out with many different needs. So it's not always, you can't just build one size fits all. And what we found is that there are certain subpopulations within this group that have really distinct needs and have really distinct housing needs. One of the projects we worked on, we had individuals who were in state prison for long periods of time, serving 30, 40 of years. They had aged in place while being in prison. And the state of New York came to us and said, we have no place to put them. If we put them out when they come out on parole, that they end up in the shelters or they end up in a place, and the unfortunate result of that is very bad for individuals who may have long-term medical needs that have occurred during the course of their incarceration, have not been in society for 30, 40 years. So we created a pilot project in the Bronx, which is set up to inside a larger 157 unit building. 57 units were dedicated to individuals who had long-term incarceration and who were over the age, I think, of 55 or 60. So, and surprisingly or not, there was a large amount of people who really qualified for this type of housing. Enough so that we're looking to embark on a second project that is in pre-development right now. But the uniqueness of this project, one was we created this space for people who had long-term medical needs, but we also did it in partnership with the Lutheran Church. And we were able to work with the church and a private developer and take a church, which unfortunately in that area of the Bronx, the congregation had really shrunk, so that we were able to take that building and that property and repurpose it into affordable and supportive housing, really directed to the community and to individuals who are justice impacted with long-term needs. And I think part of the solution, and they always say the solution's in the room, the solution for this is creative partnerships, is bringing in all different stakeholders into this and showing them that this can be done and we can do it together, and that really create creative opportunities for this type of housing.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ben. I do have a follow question for Pastor LJ Jennings. And my question for you, given that your organization, you work both in, Oakland, California, as well as Ohio, I'm curious to learn if there are any differences you're seeing in terms of the landscape. I think one thing that we learned, through the toolkit and, doing all of the research, and what you'll also see as well in the toolkit, is that challenges and opportunities will really vary by geography, by locality, by even county at times. So I'm curious if you have noticed any significant differences in working in those two different localities.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yes, there's significant differences in the two from the employment perspective. In Ohio, in Cleveland specifically, there is a significant unemployment issue. So when we think about former incarcerated in Cleveland versus in California, there's a significant difference in living costs. There's no question there. But we're finding that in Cleveland, the unemployment is drastically higher. So that presents its own challenges to get individuals into stable housing. And then the other thing is the workforce itself is just not as sophisticated and or mature in terms of their skill set. So we're finding that we're needing to now really focus on how do we build the skill set of the residents in Ohio or in Cleveland. How do we build their skill set to a level that makes them more competitive with some of the other folks that are applying for the same kind of jobs? So we see that as really being a major piece. The education level also is not as high. So across the board, Brianna, there's major differences in terms of the same population that we're serving in terms of what their outlooks are. So in Cleveland, it just means that we're spending more time up front in vocational training, more time up front in what it means to, what it means to be responsible and making the kind of good decisions. And so therapeutic sessions and groups are more important to that population than maybe the California folks. But overall, we see the best in everybody. And as you said earlier, and one of my mantras is that we don't care about your history. We're only concerned about your destiny. And so to that degree, we're really, as we all know, as you work with any individual, every individual their plan is individualized. And so we start where they are and move them through that journey, keeping them encouraged, keeping them motivated, and making sure that we are always, always, always in every one of our programs, in every one of our facilities, that we are always aspirational. Keeping an aspirational environment is absolutely critical so that individuals will begin to see themselves in their potential and not in what their background was. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Pastor. Awesome. So my next question, and we've kind of been talking a little bit about this, sprinkling it in throughout this series. But one question, I guess one question that I have is, how can social service providers and housing providers better work together to provide good, safe, and stable housing? I mean, this includes faith-based organizations. How can we better work together and really rely on the resources of one another to create this housing that we so desperately need?
Yeah, Brianna, for me, it's all about the willingness to create and maintain partnerships. You can't work in silos. Collaboration is extremely important. And I am a strong advocate to always have people at the table that have lived experience, because they know their challenges better than anybody and what they're facing. And it's a great way to measure kind of any gaps that aren't being recognized and that need to be addressed immediately. And you also can start to build through lived experience efforts relationships with landlords and developers, so that they can see that what we as social service providers are saying that are not true, like the false narratives that they're, because housing is a human right, building not only relationships among developers with social organizations, but including lived experience experts. I just think it's vital to that partnership and collaboration, and to get any work done. Hearing their voices is very important.
I would say this, the social service provider is key to the success of any one of these housing projects, anything we're doing. As the pastor spoke about, in order for someone to successfully re-enter, there's a lot of support systems that need to be in place. At Fortune, the way we operate, we provide services in 12 different program areas. We provide what we consider a holistic approach. So, it is when we are planning any housing development, the input we get from our social service colleagues on how to structure the building, on how to provide the services, is key to the success of it. So if you're thinking of doing this, and Fortune's kind of unique because we've grown from this little organization into one that does all these different areas. But to partner, if you don't do those areas, it's to create the partnership with other social service providers in the area where you're looking to create this housing. And that partnership is the key to making it successful. And also, one other thing I think we haven't really discussed here, but I think it's of some note, is that there is community resistance to this type of housing sometimes. That they don't, we have the term NIMBY is used, not in my backyard. And it's something that we've had to overcome, especially here in New York City. And I would say this, yeah, what Fortune has done in our way of looking, we are very transparent when we're looking to develop a project in a community. We go to every community board meeting, we meet with all the stakeholders, we are out there, and we are clear about what we do. And the other thing we do is we invite people from the community to come to our other developments so they can see how our communities operate, how our buildings operate, and how we are value added to a community when we come in there and develop housing. But the other part, and I would just say this, when you're creating housing in a community, is to listen to the community, because they will tell you what the things they would like to see in this type of housing and the things that are concerning to them. We had a situation where we were building in East Harlem, and the community was concerned about that there were already a lot of substance use treatment programs in the area, and that we would be putting another one in the bottom of our building in the community space. And we heard them. So we were able to express them that was not our plan. And we actually put vocational training into more vocational training into the community space in our building. But if you don't listen to the community, you're going to get pushback. And I would say this, when we ended up going to front of the community board, we got a 35-0 approval on that building because we listened to them when we developed the building. And that is something we have to talk about, because unfortunately the myths around this population are embedded in a lot of the community members who see this type of housing as being something that will lower the land values in their community, will create more crime, will do all these things, when it's the exact opposite. And actually, we've seen in the areas where we have developed properties, the value of the properties around us has gone up, and people have done and the communities are safer, and that they are in one of our buildings. We became the point where the community board actually meets in our building, and we became a voting precinct for the community. So those are types of things that you do to engage with the community so that they feel much more comfortable with this type of housing, and that they see the benefits of it and not just think it's going to be something that's going to be detrimental to their community. I know that was a tangent, but I thought we'd something.
No, thanks, Ben. That's great. And I'll add real quickly, I know we're close to time. Two things. In Cleveland, when we went forth to create our facility there was tremendous pushback in the neighborhood. Now, this neighborhood is one of the poorest. It has a majority of the justice impacted individuals living in that neighborhood. Just a number of things. But when the community, and there were just a few that said, we don't want those people in our neighborhood. Those people were their children and grandchildren, their family members. But they said, we don't want those people. So what we I'm saying this because you have to be sold out for the population you're serving, committed to their well-being. So all I did was tweaked how we were presenting it, tweaked the development, and rather than create it as one facility, I took it and created 8 mini pieces in the same building. There could be no pushback on that. But to the specific question, Brianna, and I really appreciate that. And this toolkit is very helpful for that. It brings together ecosystem partners across this country. It brings together, for all of us that are doing this work, it brings together a resource that we can all utilize to create what I'm going to call a thought leaders group. A thought leaders group is and many of you are probably doing this, but I don't believe, and we do great work, and we all do great work, but I don't believe that I know everything about everything. I don't believe that I have the best practice. I don't believe that I have the most efficient, but that's where we get when we come together as an ecosystem partners to sit around the table on a quarterly basis and talk about our programs and talk about, you know, what's working and what's not working and how do you overcome this and how do you overcome that. I think that the answer, as Ben earlier said, it's always in the room. The challenge is, do we invite others into the room?
Yeah.
Do we invite others to sit around the table? And so when we think about how social service providers and housing providers can better work together, I think it's right there. How do we all come with you know, complete vulnerability, sharing how we do things in this competitive world, and not be afraid that somebody's going to steal my idea and go do it better and get funding that's going to take away from me. And I think that is the key. We have to be as I say, sold out for the mission, And if we're sold out for the mission, then we don't mind sharing information, and we're not going to be afraid of letting somebody else know how we do it and what we do it and why we do it. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. That's I can't even follow that. That's a very powerful way to it's very well said. And certainly I think you all touched upon really key parts, which is that this work is very hard to do by yourself, and by partnering, not only do you make it easier, but you really create more opportunities and truly a network of opportunities across the country. So thank you so much for sharing that. And certainly, you know, we're talking about a lot of concepts here, but this is all both conceptually as well as practically written into the toolkit. The language that you need in terms of the statistics of you know, the population, the history, the intersectionality of it all between employment and housing and health, it's all written in the toolkit in two parts. One, really the case making piece, and then secondly, there's a more practical aspect of it, you know, how to find the right partner, what to look for, how to actually engage in the community, which is what Ben was talking about, and you know, really making sure that you're responding, what to look for in a partner to make sure you're mission aligned. So these are certainly components that are very well written in the toolkit. Okay. All right. So we are at 2:01, where we have a little bit of extra time here. So I want to open up the floor now. We will start first with questions in the chat that were raised. And then from there, we will see if anyone else has any questions afterwards. So with that being said, I'll ask my colleague, Kinsley. Kinsley, any questions in the chat that we can start off with?
Yeah, we actually have a question from Ange. They ask, how does communal living work specifically with probation?
Was that directed to anyone in particular? We serve that population, so I can certainly answer. So communal living with regards to probation, and we have several programs that we house individuals that are on probation or recently released from probation in a shared communal living. We work with them, we provide them all of the wraparound services. And then we also, so the program that we have is a self-pay program. So they get a room in one home, or if you will, and they pay, I think it's like $700 a month. We provide all of their food and all of the wraparound services. It is an unsupervised program. However, each house is themselves, it's self-managed by the residents in the house. So they all keep accountability to each other and with each other with regards to the quote unquote house rules, if you will. And so we do weekly meetings with them. But at the end of the day, it is the communal living is really that, as I said earlier, that stepping stone where you come out of a programmed facility and then you go into the next step into into your own housing. And that's what we see as that next step from transitional into shared or communal, then to your own. And we work with them through that whole journey.
Amazing. And we do have like a shared resource presented by Melanie. They write, impact justice shared economy model for reentry housing truly puts the word home into homecoming projects. It is an impactful partnership between those in need and those with a desire to create meaningful change. And they're grateful for the national efforts. So it looks like it's a shared resource for a shared economy model for people who are interested. And Melanie provided the link and shared it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kinsley. So now there we go. I want my big face up there. Okay, great. So thank you so much for that. I'm assuming those are all the questions in the chat. If so, then I want to open up the floor. If anyone here in this meeting has a question, please feel free to raise your hand so we can keep track of order and unmute. Okay. Okay, well, while hopefully people are thinking about any questions or comments or anything like that, I think one thing here at Enterprise that we've really been trying to, one thing we've really been interested in and really trying to coordinate again across different geographies in terms of different localities as well, again, is really how to get people into the same room. Um, I think a lot of organizations, and what I've seen, I've worked on different work groups in different geographies and, Mid-Atlantic region and Ohio, et cetera. And I think one thing that we've seen is that it can be really challenging to get people in the same room for whatever reason. So I think one question that I have for our panelists, how are you actually how do you actually find people? How do you find other partners to actually collaborate with? I think the toolkit talks about what to look for in a partner, but how do you actually find people and build those relationships, particularly when you're working within a development team? This question could be answered by anyone. Feel free to.
Well, I would say this, sometimes it happens, we're out, all of us are out in our team, we're out networking, we're talking to people. We go to events like this all the time. We're trying to really promote this type of housing. And so we're constantly looking for partners. And when we meet people or interesting organizations that are doing interesting work in the field, we try and see how maybe we can incorporate their work into our housing projects and to see how we can create partnerships. And some of this Enterprise has been great about facilitating it. We were part of the pathway projects, but we really I've met a number of people just from being in these events. And what I tell people, for me, and I would say to anybody on this call, feel free to email me anytime about any questions you have around housing development. And like the pastor said, I am not ashamed that I steal good ideas from other great nonprofits that are working in this area. Because if we see programs that are working and we see a way to structure deals and how to do things, we want to know about it. Because just like the pastor said, we don't know everything. And we have seen some really creative ideas being put out into the field right now, and different ways of thinking about how to do this. And that's the only way this is going to be successful. And we have to evolve as the needs of this population evolve. We need to evolve as well on how we're providing this type of housing. So
I'll just add to what Ben says. I think in some cases, you can be certainly intentional about looking at and going after partners in the ecosystem. But many times it happens organically. It happens organically just because you're serving that population. individuals hear, they learn about. You can learn about it from some of the residents. Every program is not a good fit for everyone. And so sometimes if they're not a good fit for your program, they may go somewhere else. And then all of a sudden that creates, where they go creates an opportunity to build some alliances. So many times it's organic as well as intentional. With regards to going to conferences and forums like this and other things. I think that it's a combination of all of that.
And I'll just add to what Pastor Jennings said. Our work, besides working with enterprise and the focus groups, we've been that was part of our project to have intentional open houses where we invite not only the community in, citizens, but also landlords and realtors to have these tough discussions. And we did include lived experience experts in some of those trainings and roundtable discussions so that we could see a better trajectory down the road to have these strong partnerships and maintain them.
Thank you for that. Those are all really great, great answers. One other question that just came in, and this is a really, really great question. What are some ways that an operator slash provider of a housing or social service, organization can educate insurers and lenders during standard touch points within these groups? So in other words, how can, the organizations that are doing this work, that are, supporting this population, how can they educate insurers and lenders that may be not as familiar, with housing this population? How can we educate them in our interactions and engagements with them?
Well, I can tell you, I do this every day. So it is part, I think, of the reason we did the toolkit. I think the toolkit is an excellent resource to start from because it gives you a lot of the information that you can provide to lenders and to insurers. But it's really being able to explain to them what the impact of the work we do, how we do it, and to talk to them about that the risks they think, if you're talking to insurers, that exist in this with this population are not true. And if someone wants to contact me separately, I can go through and show you that. And we've compiled information that we've given out to lenders and insurers before about this type of work, but a lot of it's already embodied in the toolkit. And I would be more than happy to. I think this is we're going to kind of get into the minutia of this about how you deal with, especially when you're dealing with insurers, the risk people, and the lenders. But I would also say this: for lenders, lending on this should be no different criteria than lending on any other type of project. And that's what we explain to them, that there is no additional risk. And I can say this, that we have lenders now here who really understand this field. And it's through education with them and inviting them to see our projects and letting them understand what we're doing. I apologize to my dog. She just woke up. She was sleeping.
Let me add to what Ben said, if I may, Brianna. CDFIs, community banks, are I would suggest it should be your first lender that you should approach for something like this, because they have a definite community focus and they have a definite they understand community work. So that's just personal. That's just personal. The other is how do you really get them to understand this? It is in your story. Hear me. It's in your story. When we first did our first project, when we first did our first 100-bed facility, remember, we were just doing single family housing. And we then went to a 100-bed facility. So it was incumbent upon me to write a great story story, and the story, and the story really dealt with our, not just our history, but our impact, the impact, and how we were able to impact, and the number of people, and all of that. And we married that with testimonies from some of our residents, and we married that with a bunch of different things. And then as we went to then our second and third and all of that, it becomes easier because then I use the lender, our original lender, to share with in a testimony about their relationship with us and how impactful the work is. And so
Yeah.
we just continue to build off of that. So I would just suggest that it's that you have a great compelling story, and then you use your lenders to give you testimony.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Pastor. We are at 2:15, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much. I think that's a really great way to keep the story going and to bring in new stakeholders in terms of creating, this important narrative. Thank you so much to our speakers today for joining us. Thank you to my colleague Kinsley, who's been managing the chat and everything. And thank you all for joining. I just put my email in the chat. So if anyone has any questions or follow up, please feel free to send me an email. And there are also some enterprisers on this call as well, depending on the market. So again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day. Take care.